Hello and welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and today I want to spotlight some really cool corals, Frogspawn and hammer corals. This is my Euphyllia garden, and it's made up of hammer corals and frogspawns. And hammer corals and frogspawns are Euphyllia corals. There is a third major Euphyllia coral, which is the torch coral. And I don't use torch corals in my Euphyllia garden because torch corals will actually burn other Euphyllias. Where, as you can see here, hammer corals and frog spawns can butt up right next to each other, their tentacles can touch, and it does absolutely no damage to the coral that it sits next to. Among hammer corals and frog spawns, there are two major types. You have branching varieties and you have wall varieties. What we're looking at here is a branching hammer. And there's some huge benefits to the branching varieties. First, in my experience, the branching varieties are just easier. They're more resilient than the wall varieties. Second, they're easily fraggable. The heads grow off and a pair of bone cutters can just snip them off. If you got a wet saw, that's even better. But they're quick growing, easily fraggable, incredibly beautiful with many different color variants. Wall hammers, like this gold hammer you're looking at, are very slow growing. I bought this gold hammer almost 2 years ago, and its growth is almost imperceptible. So they're slow growing, and they're almost impossible for the average hobbyist to frag. These grow up out of a large base, and they grow up as basically one big head. And the only real way to frag one of these is to get a wet saw and cut it in half. Unfortunately, the survival rate on cut wall hammers is much less than would be desired. So you take a huge risk when you cut an expensive coral like this in half of losing the entire colony. The other problem with fragging wall hammers is they grow so slow. If you cut it, it will take years before it reaches its previous size. So when deciding which wall hammer to buy it based on color and size for the spot you want it to go in, knowing that it probably won't grow much in the next few years. Now, among hammers and frog spawns, there's a huge variety in the way these look. The frog spawn on top is green with these brilliant purple tips. But if you'll notice, the tentacles are really thin on this guy. And I believe that actually has to do with its ability to put up with higher water flow. In my experience, hammers and frog spawns really don't like a lot of water flow. But this coral you're looking at, I've had in high flow and it's done really well. And I believe it's actually the coral itself. That thin tentacle design allows it to take more flow, which is why it's positioned higher up on the reef in almost a flow blocking spot, because this coral really does well in higher flow. But you can see down here on the left, this is also a frog spawn, but the tentacle pattern is completely different. It's got a big fat center that splays out like a flower with short little tentacles on it. The frog spawn below it has big, fat, thick, beautiful tentacles. When you look at this thing, you can't even see the center of the polyp. It's just all fat tentacles. So when shopping for frog spawns and hammers, you're going to find a huge variation amongst the corals. You're going to find lots of different colors. There's also a really nice kind of pink, almost burgundy color, which I currently don't have any of, but I have had in the past, and they are absolutely beautiful. You'll find huge colonies, over a foot across, are very common in your local fish stores. But you'll also find very inexpensive 1-inch frags that will grow huge. In fact, this little green guy started off as a little tiny 2-headed frag, and look at him now. He's huge and beautiful. So hammer corals and Frogspawn corals are fairly easygoing corals. They can take a lot of light. I've had these guys directly under 250 watt metal halides. I've had them directly under LEDs, power compacts, T5s. They can handle and love a lot of light. But they can also tolerate a much more moderate light. As you can see, this Frogspawn down here is kind of shaded out by the others. When the T5s kick on, it lights it up, but it's not getting near the light of some of the upper corals. And look at it, it's thriving. So they're not real picky about light, spectrum, color, intensity. They kind of do well in anything you're going to throw at it. In my experience though, water flow is what these guys are really picky about. They're kind of on the low end of the moderate water flow scale is what most of these guys like. Like I stated earlier, you're going to find ones that do really well in high flow. But for the most part, you're more likely to hurt these guys with high water flow more than anything else. And if you remember a previous video I did, I actually hurt my gold hammer pretty bad because I put it in a place where it was getting way too much water flow. It pulled in real bad. It tore the tissue from the skeleton. I was afraid I was going to lose this guy. So when you're placing your hammer coral, place it in a place where it's kind of safe from high water flow. What about feeding? Do we need to feed these guys? Not really. They do absolutely fine if you don't feed them. You can get huge growth out of not feeding them, great coloration out of not feeding them, but these guys will absolutely eat. I've fed them mysis, I've fed them krill, I feed them the LRS that I feed my fish, and they absolutely eat what falls down on them. But feeding's not necessary, it's just a cool thing you can do to it, and I absolutely believe it does help their health. Unfortunately, with feeding, every time you put food in the tank, you kind of affect the nutrient level of the tank, so it's kind of hit or miss as to whether you want to do that. So there's my Euphyllia garden. This is one of my favorite parts of this tank. And if you remember, I designed this whole section for Euphyllia. I designed the rock work to block the water flow in this section. So I can have high flow in the tank to keep my SPS happy, but then have this really awesome jam-packed section full of Euphyllia. There's about 11 Euphyllia here, both made up of Frogspawns and hammers, and I love this section of my tank. It is probably my favorite section of this tank. So thanks for watching this episode of Mile High Reefers. I know I didn't cover every Euphyllia available to you. These are the ones I have. These are the ones I love. So if you like what I do, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. I've always got more videos coming out, and thanks again for watching.